Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Combat Carnivore. Today with me is Brianna Brawley, and she's one of my favorite people in the world. Brianna, go ahead and introduce yourself with your titles, with your expertise, and all the above.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you for having me. And favorite
Absolutely.
person in the world. Oh,
One of my favorite humans in the world is Brianna.
I feel like that's a promotion. Uh, let's start with that title. One of Chad's favorite people in the world. No, so I'm a nervous system regulation and performance coach, and yeah, in a nutshell, I mean, I've been doing this stuff for about 12 years now. So I support athletes and entrepreneurs in navigating their fight, flight, freeze response and how that um, essentially determines our ability to think clearly, to process pressure, to process, and thrive under stress in
Mhm.
competitive, contexts, in entrepreneurial contexts, essentially using the nervous system and regulating the nervous system to open us up to be able to really live the life that we dream of rather than just kind of like getting by, surviving, on autopilot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, obviously you've been doing it for 12 years, but that's a great way to put it. Um, your title, the way you put it, I mean, that's not something you can just go major in college. It's like, what do you want to major in? And it's your title, right? How did you fall into this? Like, how did you discover it? How did you even did you forge this field or did you like meet somebody else who was doing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the title was like it's one of them things I'm forever playing around with because the thing is like when I say mindset coach, people are like, "Oh, I kind of get that," but that's not what I do. Mindset is
Right.
part of it. I'm consistently playing around with like, what's the thing that encompasses what I do, but that people get.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it was kind of an unfolding. I started with, and this is the very condensed version, but I was a personal trainer for a number of years. And I noticed both in my own training, I used to compete in fitness modeling, so a variation of bodybuilding. And so I noticed my own results physically, as well as those of my clients, seem to be capped depending on where someone's self-concept and their mindset was at. And so that really led me down this path of like digging really deep into understanding mindset, into understanding like what the difference is between someone who thrives in their chosen pursuit and someone who, barely scrapes by. And, navigating that got me and my clients phenomenal results until it didn't, and I started to notice that like that realm mindset was capped. There was like this glass ceiling that I would keep coming up against and my clients would keep coming up against. And so I started to ask myself, well, like, what's underneath that? Like, what's the difference between, again, someone who um, thrives and someone who just kind of keeps repeating the same patterns? And I realized that it's very much based upon what feels safe to us, not
mm.
what we think we want to do, but what our body is actually conditioned to believe is safe and available to us. And so that's when I kind of started to really dive into understanding fight, flight, freeze, understanding, yeah, that our nervous system is the determining factor of everything. Like we're only ever experiencing the world. We're only ever experiencing our nervous system reflected back to us in the world.
Mm. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Obviously, I'm going to agree because it's right. But I always tell people we are like a filter. So we take in input with our senses and our sensory organs, and then how we feel about that is like how we interpret the world and who we are and what we consider to be this life experience. And there's a lot of life philosophies out there, and I was wanting to talk to you about this, like Taoism and Stoicism, that kind of their main theme is like conquering yourself, and it's not trying to conquer the rest of the world. Once you conquer yourself, which is the hardest task, everything else comes easy because you are self-regulated. You know what I mean? You're not out of control, and that's a reoccurring motif in philosophy, is like who are you in this rather than who are like what is your response in this. So when I tell people like who are brand new to jujitsu, I tell them all the time, it's like like I'm going to explain. I'm doing not doing a very good job, so I'm going to give it an example. People are always like, I'm out of shape. Like, no, you're just rolling wrong, right? And
Mm.
every single time, like the most in shape person goes to a competition and afterwards, like, oh, my forearms are dead. Oh, I'm out of shape. I can't. No, you are just going 110% regardless of what that shape is. And so it's like we need to correct you in this mindset, and then how you compete will completely change. And so all of a sudden you start feeling in shape because you're not freaking blowing your load every single match and going past what your body can handle. So that's why I tell like brand new people too. I was like, let's work on yourself. Let's work on your breathing. Let's work how you're interpreting what a role is. You're not here to like kill somebody or fend off somebody to kill you quite yet. And then it's
Yeah.
like, I don't want you throwing up on the mats. So that's kind of how I put it. How would you critique that?
No, that you nailed that. And I think this is a thing, right? Like it's never actually about the circumstances.
Mm.
Like it's not that we want to change the way our forearms feel after a competition, or it's not that we want to change the way the competition went as such. It's the way we feel about ourselves as a result of the circumstance. And so as you
Mm.
said, like when we alter our relationship with ourselves, um like everything changes because we're no longer seeing it through the lens of this disempowering feeling, or this feeling of being stripped of our power. When we alter the relationship with ourselves and inherently know and operate from our power and from our center and from groundedness, then like it doesn't matter what the external circumstances are, because we get that everything's always unfolding in our favor. Like the um every loss is stacking and giving us the information we need to get the win, and so on.
I swear, and we'll have this conversation later on because I don't want to get into it quite yet, but I swear to God, you're a stoic. We're gonna have this conversation. But you like everything you say, I'm like, yeah, I'm listening to the person who is the ultimate stoa. Like you are the ultimate. It's funny. But we'll get into that later. So like your specialty is like high performing athletes, pretty much. However, and I wanted to talk to you more about entrepreneurism
Yeah.
because I'm in the midst of that. I want to ask, especially I'm in this weird realm and I'm trying to ask you this question without ruining it. So, would you first and foremost change your advice if somebody was a brand new beginner to jujitsu? Like, what would that advice look like in your position as a coach as compared to somebody? And as you've done, you've coached people who are extremely high performing, extremely high value athletes, including myself, of course. But in reality, you have coached some people way above me. And so, what changes in your posture of coaching depending on what level, or is it the same?
That's a great question. um I would say nothing really changes. I mean, the only difference is that someone who has been in the game a little bit longer has more reference points to draw on.
Mm.
But it's the difference between, like, and I'll use myself as an example. I mean, I'm only a third stripe blue belt at this point, so I don't have like a
Dang,
I don't
dang,
have
Brianna, you're cruising. Whoa.
I
Congratulations. I need to keep up with my social media. Congratulations, three stripe blue
thank you.
belt.
I appreciate that. But in contrast, I don't have the same depth of experience as you do. Um, However, based on my depth of experience at this point, I reflect on when I first started in jiu-jitsu, and it was
Mm.
very much a love-hate experience. Like it was very much like I would go into panic. And for me, that was my own stuff from like childhood experiences, but it was very much just panic and just like rip in, and your classic spazzy white belt, right? um and
But you were
so
you were probably strong too, like an athlete and strong. So you wanted to
yes,
rely on getting to
yes,
places, right? That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so it's I've had at this point, like from fresh white belt through to third stripe blue, I've had the experience of everything that's kind of shaped that journey of like, okay, like in that comp, my forearms burnt out because I was too spazzy. In that
Mhm.
situation, I was maybe too relaxed and they passed my
Mm,
guard as a result of it. And so, I've got these kind of reference points of like what my optimal is. A
nice.
fresh white belt doesn't have that same, it doesn't have the same, they don't have the same catalog of reference points, but it's the difference between like, it took me from fresh white belt to now to figure out my reference point. Whereas, sorry, to figure out my optimal kind of balance point,
Right.
and I'm still learning, don't get me wrong, I haven't mastered it. Whereas a fresh white belt, when I sort of am teaching them to regulate and to not spaz out and so on, they have less information, but they're getting there a lot quicker. Like like I've seen white belts who've like had one jiu-jitsu class and then come to me and learn nervous system regulation. And then it's like I watch them overtake the other white belts who've been training for months. And it's
Nice.
that difference of like when you're regulated, you're taking in more information, you're able to think logically, you're able to think creatively, you're resourceful, you can sort of like adapt and mitigate and notice nuances that you wouldn't notice um if you're spazzing. And so there's pros and cons, but ultimately, in my opinion, the road to get where you want to go becomes a lot more efficient, and it's probably very much sped up when you learn this stuff early on.
Yeah, I think it would be a launching pad. And for my online jujitsu community, where I have this introductory course, I notice people, it's so cool to influence people when they first start their journey. Cause like what you're seeing, it's like you start watching them compared to the other white belts, and you're like, yo, like I know that's because of my influence, but not necessarily because of my influence, because they're getting the resources that they need. And so I
Yes.
developed this fully comprehensive introduction to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, literally taking people from in their car. And I'm like, I know this is nerve wracking, but let's walk in together and let's, see what the gym is. And this is what they're going to be doing. People are going to be bowing. You may not know where to stand. Like, don't wear your shoes on the mat. And I kind of get you through the social norms and the taboos of the jujitsu gym. And then I go through like the moves and the conceptual jujitsu. So that way people are walking in, like understanding the language. And all of a sudden, like it's not a bunch of stuff going over their head all the time and they feel more comfortable. And like you said, like, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you if this makes sense to you, because what I tell people oftentimes is being a martial artist is one of the ultimate forms of being human. And what I mean by that is when somebody is trying to attack you, you have another human being trying to attack you. That should be the ultimate reason why somebody would go into fight or flight, or animalistic behaviors. But you are training in the worst scenarios when someone's this close to choking you, when someone's this close to breaking your arm, when you're suffocating and someone's fat is right in your face and you can't breathe, and you just feel like you're going to die. You don't go into fight or flight. You remain human the whole time. And I think that is the beauty of being a martial artist and a warrior, is you are finding how far it takes before you go from being human to an animal. And the better you are a martial artist, the further that line is, which is why I think it's a tactic to play like the verbal jujitsu. It's like to get underneath somebody's skin, to make them mad. Because once they start responding like an animal, then you can overtake them because you're a human fighting an animal. You know what I mean? You're more intelligent in this sense.
Yeah.
So that, would you agree with that assessment basically?
Yeah. I mean, I've always said like the thing that I really love about extreme sports, so not just combat sports in this context,
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking like motocross, like trick riding, like all of those sports where it's like there's a life or death element. What I love about them is that it's life condensed into like a round or a particular um like this fraction of time for your performance, but the volumes turn right up. So it's like the stress and pressures of going through high school, the stress and pressures of navigating like a career, the stress and pressures of relating, like all of those things bring up your stuff. They bring up,
Mm,
when you freeze up, they bring up when the pressure's too much, they bring up when you're afraid of being seen, they bring up when you're judging yourself. They're, all of it. That comes up in fighting sports. It's just
mhm,
condensed down to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it may
mhm.
be. And the volume's turned way up because it's so in
Yeah.
your and
High
so, that,
intensity.
yeah. And that's why I love it so much, because it's like, what's that saying? There's like that cliche of like the mats never lie.
Oh
It's like,
yeah.
yeah, you're gonna meet yourself. Like, you want to do a combat sport, you're gonna find out exactly who the fuck you are.
Yeah. Whatever your self-perceived toughness in the hierarchy of society is, you get a reality check.
Yeah,
Some 16-year-old kid who used to get bullied, who looks like a dweeb, it's just wrapping you up and you thought you were an athlete and you thought you were tough and you thought that you were like, I mean, take it easy on this kid. You never know. You're going to get
yeah,
a 115 purple belt female who just is a wizard and just put you in your place. And you're like, I have no idea what's happening. Yeah. So the
yeah,
mats don't lie. And I mean, how many of us have felt, and this is why I want to get into this next. How many of us felt like they were having a crummy day, went to jujitsu, got their ass handed to them, which I mean, on paper means you would probably feel worse. But all of a sudden, it's like you go home just feeling like chill. You feel like ah man, that was good. I needed that. It's like someone to put you in your place. I tell veterans, and I want to get into this here in a little bit, but it's like it's very important that you start to simulate combat and then realize you're okay on the other side.
yeah,
That's very important. I think humans, and depending on where people stand, some people stand in different places, but for millions of years, right, we have dealt with atrocities. We have dealt with very difficult lives. Like a daily life of our ancestor is probably a fucking trauma for a, a millennial or a Gen Zer. You know what I mean? Like they wouldn't be
totally.
able to handle it. So our physiology, I feel like our dopamine releases, they're all balanced in the sense of dealing with horrible things. And the fact that nobody's dealing with horrible things, we have to create horrible things in order to
Mhm.
get over, right? And so jujitsu is one of those perfect ways to put us in our place, to simulate that in a safe environment, and then come out the other side like, ah, now I deserve dinner. You know what I mean? Like it simulates that lifestyle. What would you kind of like, how would you assess that
Yeah.
assessment? How would you assess that assessment?
Yeah, no, I would agree. It makes me think of like, and this is kind of a bizarre analogy to draw on, but it's like I've heard that when you've got a pet cat, like they really suggest that like if your cat's a bit, spazzy and like a bit too high energy, um, the best thing that you can do is like wait till either dawn or dusk, and because that's when they do all their hunting out in the wild,
Okay.
and like play and basically like make them chase the little mouse, like toy mouse on the end of the stick, and then feed them after. So it's like it's calling on their kind of like hunting mechanism, their instinctual response, and then rewarding them for the hunt. It's a successful hunt. And it's kind of the same thing like for humans, but it's, as you said, society's changing so rapidly that we're losing that kind of grindstone to test ourselves against. And so I really do think there's something to be said for, especially for men. I think it's a little bit different for women, but men in particular, um they need that. They need that, kind of that grindstone, that yeah, to test themselves, to
Yeah.
stay connected with that animal instinct, to stay connected with that warrior instinct. um there's a quote in the movie Fight Club, and that's one of my favorite movies, and I'm going to butcher it, but I think it speaks to everything we're kind of talking about here, that like once you've fought, the volume is turned down on everything else.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that makes sense because we're meant to deal with traumas. I strongly do not believe that you deal with a trauma and like for the rest of your life, you need like a fucking therapist to help you do basic things. I don't think that's the way it is. I think like traumas, maybe you need guidance, right
Mm.
after the trauma to like help help deal with the emotion, right? Regulate it, figure
Mm.
out what if you can't do that on your own. But like it shouldn't be something you deal with for the rest of your life. It's like traumas are meant to move us forward. Every single species, every single one of your ancestors like has battled horrible things to make you, and now you can't even handle like somebody saying something you don't like. So and what you were saying about the cats cracked me up because it makes sense because there's a huge problem in big cities of cats just like killing birds for no reason and then not eating them just for sport because they're eating enough, but they're not hunting enough. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that was just
And
a weird thing.
I mean, all you have to do is like look at society, right? Like we're in many ways overfed, and so we have this
Definitely
kind of like,
overfed.
yeah, like we've got this kind of pandemic, if you will, of like men addicted, or humans addicted to porn, addicted to drugs, addicted to social media, addicted to food, addicted to whatever the stimulus may be. Um, and it's kind of this like it's that mechanism of like, well, we're doing it just to entertain ourselves because we've got nothing else to um there's nothing else to use as a reference point to meet ourselves, and to really find our edges.
Yeah, because what is our like Viktor Frankl talks about this. It's like when a man doesn't have a purpose, he seeks like pleasure to fill the time, right? And this makes sense physiologically because our bodies and brains for millions of years had to do so much work to get the dopamine. So dopamine became very addictive, right? And now we're just getting the quickest thing to dopamine. Like to get
Yeah.
see a naked woman used to take a lot. You used to have to hunt to become an important member of the tribe in order to get married to like it took a lot of effort to be worthy of like marrying somebody and then
Mm.
having sex. Now you can just type in a few buttons and you can get anything you want. Food.
Totally.
It used to take a ton of effort. Now people just wake up and eat a shit ton of carbs and they get their dopamine. Where are the other chemicals that are going to motivate them to get through the rest of the day? No wonder you have anxiety because the
Yeah.
chemicals preceding dopamine are going to help with that physiological balance, that biological balance of to do the hard things, right?
Yeah.
You're waking up, you're getting blue light in your eyes right off the bat. You're getting all the information very easy. You're solving, I mean, all the things that are difficult problems for your body are now coming so easy. We're overfed. And in my conspiracy, it's like it give them circus and bread, right? Entertain the masses and overfeed them. And then they're just going to be dormant, slave like people. And they don't know that they're slaves. And so I know I'm getting off into the weeds here, but I strongly, that just hit a soft point because that's like what my channel, I decided to develop it into to try to get specifically veterans. And I don't know, have you worked a lot with veterans?
Um, no, not particularly. A couple, but no, nothing's too over the top.
But I believe you would be expert enough if I were to ask you these
Yeah.
next questions that you would be able to answer them because I strongly believe for veterans, getting involved in jujitsu for the things that we just talked about is going to help them extremely. Well, and tell me if I'm wrong in saying this with their parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
because what's happening is they have a swollen hypothalamus, hippocampus, right? Their fight or flight, and they're having a very difficult time getting that into their prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
right? And by saying that all correctly, correct me
Yeah.
if
Yeah. Yep.
okay.
Yep.
And I believe that jujitsu, along with a couple other things, is a great way to start that transfer because you are trapped and there's no way out. And even if you have a panic attack, even if you see red, right? Even if you feel like you're going to have, my friend calls it this, so I'm sorry if it offends anyone, but a PTSD flare up, right? Like I'm having a flare up. Um, I'm joking. Sorry, I'm a veteran. So like I'm joking inappropriately, the dark humor, but it's like, regardless of what happens on those mats, that's not going to get the purple belt off of you.
Mm.
You know what I mean? You're either going to have to tap out or you're going to have to get to the other side and realize you are okay, which is why I believe that jujitsu is such a good place for veterans. So, based on your expertise, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, my take on it is that, the nervous system learns through experience, right? So I've been speaking a lot actually in my work of late around range and how like the range of our expression, and how kind of how what's a good way of putting this? Like how minimal or how expansive our range is kind of determines like how we operate and what opportunities we have available to us and so on. And so if our nervous system learns through experience, we kind of get um, caught in like one way of doing things, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so when I think of veterans, it's like if they've been out in combat and, like many of the things that I would assume you have to deal with when you're in the forces, like the stresses, some of the kind of authoritarian dynamics, or however you want to kind of describe that. It's a lot of like you're pushing your edge a lot. And so that becomes the norm. Like if we think of the range, like your range is expanded to here. And then so a lot of the time, and we even see this with like athletes, they go from having this like super active kind of lifestyle to like retiring from their chosen sport, and then they stack on weight, and then they lose their sense of purpose and they don't know who they are, and then they
Mike
find an
Tyson.
addiction. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because it's like your nervous system has been stretched to this capacity, and then all of a sudden you go back to day-to-day life and you're only dealing with like this much of what you once used to. And so there's all this space, and it's like a void, it's like a vacuum. And so it's got to be filled with something. And so it's one of the, I don't even want to use this word, but I'm going to kind of say it loosely. It's one of the downfalls of choosing to live a big life. Because once
Mm.
you've stretched your capacity to that, the moment you kind of step back and take on less, you're going to fill it with a bunch of stuff. And if you're not intentional with what you fill it with, then you're going to fill that space with like a bunch of things that aren't going to serve you, with distractions, with addictions, with, you know, um, things that take up a lot of energy, like PTSD. And I mean, that's an oversimplified way of putting it. But I really think like that's why something like entrepreneurship or jujitsu is so valuable, because you're coming up against consistent challenges, you're coming up against consistent opportunities for problem solving, and so it takes up a lot of space in a really constructive way. Does that make
Yo,
sense?
that was more than yes. To answer your question, yes, that made so much sense. But that was a very good answer. That's one of the best answers I've ever heard to a question like that.
Thank you.
Because yeah, the substance abuse crisis that's going on with veterans right now is horrific. In the United States, 22 veterans a day are committing suicide. In the United States, 135 people successfully commit suicide every day. And every single day, 1.6 million people attempt suicide.
I just
I
gave me
hope I hope I
goosebumps.
got that. Yeah, I hope I got that statistic correct, the 1.6 million. But I'll have to double check whether it's a year or whether it's a day. Regardless, those numbers are horrible. So, that being said, yeah, it's they're trying to fill it with the wrong things. And what sucks is obviously drugs are the wrong things, but then you go to a doctor and the doctor gives you drugs and like you
Mm.
already have this like physiological imbalance, lack of equilibrium, lack of homeostasis, and then it's just like filled with androgynous chemicals over and over and over again because they're trying to find the answer. And the way you just explained that and laid that out, I think like what that's going to be a short. But like we're gonna put that, and we're gonna that's gonna be viral. I love that you put it that way. You can make a lot of difference. And I talked to you about this a little bit, but I was almost one of those statistics. I almost died when I was in the army, very unorthodox way, not getting shot at or anything like that. As a matter of fact, what happened to me in the unorthodox way uh, was way worse than any of the other things I did in the army that could have been, I would say, like trauma filling. You know what I mean? And I don't know what happened, but in order to save my life, I was like hit with an EpiPen. And ever since then, I was just like a downward spiral of like anxiety and worry and phobias, and then it developed into these panic disorders and these weird like traits. And it was very, very difficult to get out. And I totally understand. It started to make sense to me. Like when these veterans, when they're filled with like crap food, processed food, inflammatory responses over and over again. And then they're, at least when they're overseas, they have a purpose. It's very
Mhm.
direct in front of them. Their, sergeants giving them, their captains giving them orders. So you know what's next. And then it's like, okay, now I'm going to finish this deployment. Now it's like they always have that carrot right in front of them. So there's not a lot to distract them. Then when they get home, it's like, it's the freedom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The curse of freedom. And man, if it could be explained to them the way you explained it to them, they would have a better understanding of what's happening. You know what I mean? And then they might
Yeah.
be able to navigate that a lot more
Yeah.
successfully.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a thing as well. Um, like you think of the lifestyle of someone who's in the army. There's not a lot of space for boredom. Like there's always stimulus. Whether that stimulus is constructive or destructive in nature, whether it's, distracting or purposeful in nature, like across the board, there's not a lot of space for boredom. And again, like this, there's overlaps here in people who are in retirement, people who've lived like these long careers and then go in retirement and suddenly, like they say, and forgive me, I don't know the stats, but like the number of people who pass away not that long after retirement, I
Hmm.
believe it's for this same reason.
Oh yeah.
Um, but it's that not only, as I mentioned before, like your capacity is stretched out to here, and then all of a sudden you're living from here. But there's also that element of like, if you haven't trained your system to be able to hold the discomfort of no
Oh
stimulus and the
yeah.
luxury of boredom, it's gonna fuck you up. Right. And this is
That's
something I
yeah.
navigated in my own world because I had, going back a number of years ago, I had my most successful year in business and in business and financially. And I had, all of these epic things going on at the same time. And so it was like my capacity was stretched to here, but there was so much stimulus. And then something shifted and there was less stimulus. And all of a sudden I was like, well, like I watched myself basically go and create all of these challenges in my life that felt really disempowering and felt so much bigger than me. And I was like, what's going on? And on reflection, I look back and I'm like, it's because I was bored. And I didn't know how, I hadn't trained myself to be able to hold the experience of boredom. So I created chaos because it gave me purpose. It gave
Oh,
me something to focus on trying to move through and to overcome. And, I mean, I've got that warrior kind of energy underlying in me. So it was that for me. It was something to fight against because I'd lost a connection to a bigger purpose.
that was that honestly was one of the best answers. And on top of that, um, explains a lot of political movements. Like the world is so good for most of these people that they have to create problems that's not good, create things in order
Totally.
just to fight it. So it's just to have a purpose. Oh,
Yeah.
so I had to look this up. I don't know why I said a day. In 2022, there were an estimated 1.6 million suicide attempts. In 2022, there are 49,476 suicides. It was our 11th leading cause of death. And 3 point men died by suicide 3.85 times more than women. And out of all the suicides, 68.46 of those were white males. So white males make a drastically large number. And it's a close second is Indian males. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. People from India. But yeah, anyway, so I just wanted to get those stats right before I put it on the interwebs. But still, that number is atrocious. That's
Yeah.
that's what it's a statistic that I believe is we it's odd that we just accept it. We're like, yeah, there's a lot of suicides. Yeah, mental health is a problem. Let's go ahead and talk about inflation. You know, I'm like, it's not talked about any like major politician. It's like not their talking points. The their veterans and their population are like literally imploding with disease, literally imploding with mental health crises, killing like in the United States, you're 4 times more likely to commit suicide than get killed on the line of duty.
Mm.
That's insane. Like we're 4 times more effective than killing ourselves, imploding, than our enemies are at killing us.
Mm.
That's insane to me.
Absolutely.
So I was almost one of those people, and as a result of getting out of that space, I've now made it my purpose to be this person. I believe I have the most effective intervention methods for people who are on that path, who are either chronically ill, majorly depressed, uh, major panic or anxiety. They feel trapped. They're in a dark place. Veterans, young men, women, depending on what they're involved with. I believe I have the most effective intervention method, in my opinion, to get them to a thriving place again. And I think the current intervention methods are obviously egregious, as we just looked at the stats. And after 20 years, in this statistic that I was telling you about earlier was done, in 2021, out of 20 years, we haven't gotten any better. The suicide rates have gotten worse amongst veterans. There was a slight decrease in the past year or so, but still, like the overall trend is horrible. So, as somebody who had a major focus in life with jujitsu, as you know, I have now combined jujitsu and entrepreneurism. Entrepreneurism, did I say that right? And I'm expanding that, right? Like I started a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym and I started moving my efforts online and I started finding new ways of helping people and reaching people. So, um, it makes sense. And I'm saying this so if somebody's listening, like everything that Brianna is saying is something like I have followed to get out of my dark place. The only thing that we haven't talked about, because we talked about jujitsu and the mind, which the mind and the body, and the soul are all three things I think need to be in some sort of harmony. Like you said, you can only go so far if your mind is holding you back. It's like a ball and chain. So it can either be like a ball and chain or it can be like jet fuel. And so if one thing is holding you back in that like Venn diagram of all three, then you're only going to get so far. So the only thing we haven't talked about is diet. And I want to get into that next. But real quick before we get into diet, I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done for me. I just finished A Man's Search for Meaning, or not A Man's Search, I talked about that earlier. As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. Do you
Okay.
know that one?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
It's one of the best ones, but basically everything that you talked about. And a lot of the time when I'm reading it, I'm thinking about the times we've talked and met. So anyway, thank you so much for everything that you've done for me in that realm.
My pleasure. My absolute
So,
pleasure.
yeah. So now I want to ask you about diet. How much
Mm.
do you believe, because this is something that I strongly believe now as somebody who's experienced it. How much do you think diet is involved in our ability to process certain things, certain stresses, certain traumas?
I have a little bit of a differing. I'll preface this by saying diet, my knowledge of diet is certainly not my strong suit. It's not my genius. I feel a little bit out of my depth to be speaking about this. Not out of my depth, maybe just out of the field that I feel aligned to speak to. But what I will say is that what I've witnessed is that your state, whether you're in fight, flight, freeze, or whether you're anchored in what's called your ventral vagus or your safety state, what state you're in very much determines your ability to digest and process and put to use the foods that you're eating. So you could be eating the perfect diet, but if you're stressed out, if you're living from a perpetual state of anxiety, if you're living from a perpetual state of stress, then your body's still not going to be able to process it optimally, right?
Agreed.
On the flip side, if you're eating shit, um, of course it's going to have an impact. And if you're deeply relaxed, if you're deeply embodied, if you're living a life that's really in alignment with what you're wanting to create, then I believe that your body is much more capable to digest that. In saying that, though, I would argue that someone who is living a life that's really aligned with what they're wanting to create and so on wouldn't be eating shit foods, because when the vision is bigger than you do what you need to do to make sure you're able to show up for that at the degree that it's asking you to. So of course you're not going to be living off Macca's and KFC and whatever else.
I love
um
that you say that.
yeah, you're not
Mackers.
going to be living off that. And
She
what do you
means
guys
McDonald's. McDonald's. Mickey D's, McDonald's. Yeah. Mackers.
that's
Sorry, I'm her
right.
translator. I'll help her out.
It's the Aussie. But you're not going to be living off shitty foods if you're deeply aligned with purpose, because it's not like it's a block, right? It's another kind of like hoop to jump through that's getting in the way of you actually being able to perform optimally. So um I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but
That was a beautiful answer. And I'm gonna have like some counterpoints a little bit, just so that way, we can hopefully sharpen each other's spears here, right? But
totally.
that was a beautiful answer. Yeah, and you are correct, right? The mind has a huge influence on your, and your thinking state has a huge influence on the way the rest of your body operates, way more so than we believe, which is why you're a stoic. But we'll get into that later. So, I believe strongly, and yes, you are correct. It seems to be that once we understand that our body is the temple, religious or not, it seems to be a fact that the better we treat this body, the more we not necessarily like worship, but treat it like it's holy, the better it will treat us. And honestly, the better the rest of our life will treat us and our outside circumstances will treat us. So I strongly believe that as well. That's, if there's anything I could take away, it's knowing that treating my body well has been a huge benefit in all areas of life that were unprecedented. So, now my argument is this. I believe that most of our mental ailments come from types of inflammation or lacking optimization of mitochondria in the brain, in addition to the fact that our brains require certain fuels, certain fats, certain nutrients that if you're not getting those things, it kind of corrupts within, it kind of molds within. And the way I kind of think about it is, when you have a house, you might, like when you first move into a house, it was a brand new house, had everything. As the years went on, though you may have had all the tools to fix your house, you were not getting the resources to fix your house. Right. And so it's like, yeah, I have the intention. I know how to fix this, but like, I haven't gotten paint in forever or wallpaper forever, or, I haven't been able to restock on these things or get the carpets cleaned. Windows are starting to break, and especially if you're a veteran, especially if you're an athlete and you have like your brain is 7% of your body mass, yet takes up to over 20% of its energy resources. It's one of the most energy taxing, if not the most energy taxing part of your body, of your existence. And so when you are somebody who is getting shot at, when you're someone who's performing at high stakes, very high stress stakes, you are causing a lot, you're causing a lot of resource drain than I think a lot of people realize. And then they're not getting replenished with those things. So I believe it's like having the tools and the know-how are like different ways of, you know, regulating our parasympathetic nervous system. However, they're not getting the resources that they need. So there's only so much you can do. You could get creative to a certain degree, but if you're just simply not getting the nutrients, while at the same time causing inflammation on your body, while at the same time causing damage to your mitochondria within the brain, they did a study. So a lot of people, of course, mitochondria, it's like the powerhouse of the cell, but really your mitochondria are the workers of the cell. Your DNA is like this blueprint and your mitochondria does all this little work. and you have like trillions of these processes happening. And how much of that in the brain is intense, these brain cells and these neurotransmitters firing off. And when those neurotransmitters are off by fractions in timing and angle and sending and receiving, things go into a chaotic mode, right? And by causing inflammation with androgynous carbs, with plant material that have defense mechanisms, and with the knowledge that we're starting to call diabetes, or sorry, let me say that again. We are starting to call dementia type 3 diabetes because the brain becomes insulin resistant. And I think this is all related. Is not only is the inflammation, but these carbs, this glucose, this energy no longer goes to the brain the way we think it does. And once that happens, the only thing that can cross the blood-brain barrier, if I'm remembering this correctly, if I'm saying this correctly, rather, are ketones. And so, like, the parts that need repair are ketone, like that need energy, rather, or need to be fed with ketones. The nutrients that we're not giving it are fed with animal fats. And so what sucks is when you look up like what is a healthy diet, you always see, I just did this video, you always see like greens and veggies and fruits, but those are androgynous carbs. Those are fiber that's going to mess up your digestive system and block nutrients. Right. And they're going to be filled with defense compounds that your body doesn't want. And a lot of people don't realize they need to be feeding that brain that is so starved, right, and thirsty for the proper nutrients, isn't getting them. And at the same time, like I said, everything I said with mitochondria, everything I said with causing inflammation, and you probably know this, that a lot of these disorders are inflammation in the brain and other inflammation in other areas that's causing these processes, especially with like the vagus nerve system, correct? As I say that correctly. And then at the same time, since it's so much of an energy drain, use it can't even properly use the energy that you're trying to feed it. So I think, yes, like one of the things that kept me from ending my own life was understanding what was going on and it being at least like, hey, I'm going to try to take some control of this. But the thing that pushed me over was going carnivore, was getting rid of every single carb, was getting rid of every single plant, was getting rid of dairy, unfortunately, which I love dairy, and then getting myself into a spot where it was getting the right nutrients and I wasn't causing inflammation anymore. And all of a sudden, like everything that you said was so much easier to execute. You know what I mean? Like my anxiety just melted away. My ability to regulate my parasympathetic nervous system, my ability to perform. And you know how well I performed. Uh, you know how well I performed after we met. I won pans, no-gi pans. I had a lot of successes. I got like third in gi pans. I got third at Worlds, no-gi Worlds. And that was right after we met. But still, even going into those matches, like I I was so scared and I was like freezing. You know what I mean? Not as much as I normally do. But in my last competition, Brianna, in my last competition, I know I'm doing a lot of talking because I'm about to give you a lot of credit. In my last competition, I was carnivore, only like not too far in to carnivore without carbs. And I could do everything you were saying like it was a joystick. I could engage my motherfucking like what we call it, like my ulterior like ego, my alter ego. I was ready to like kill this dude. But at the same time, when I was like in there competing, I was like calm. I was like letting him freak out. And I'm like watching him. I'm like, this dude is freaking out. Where before I would be freaking out too. And I was just thinking everything was legit. But I'm like, none of these attacks are like anything good. He's just kind of like spazzing. And this is a black belt. And I fought him before. And the last time I fought him, I was like, ooh, that was a pretty good black belt. But I I just felt like an animal. And when I won, and I know you and I had talked about this, I never feel good when I win. That was one of the only times ever I felt like, God, that was like a huge burst of emotion and chemicals and whatever. And I felt incredible for that win, for that victory, like the hard work all coming out in that moment. I never had that. I have never had that. So now that I have said all that, I wanted to ask you, do you think it's a possibility that a lot of people are just simply not able to get to optimal because these processes in their brain are so inflamed that they have to work extra hard, or they have to work, I don't even know, like they have to be more precise with it because they're just simply not getting the resources that they need?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the thing with nervous system regulation is it's very much like a chicken or the egg conversation, like what came first? And so, um, yes, absolutely, that could be. I would happily bet that would be a massive determining factor for most people. And like when we look at, like the nervous system it's a biological, physical structure. And like we look at things like someone's posture, like we sit here like this on our laptops or our, phones or whatever all day, every day. There's like posturally, there's abnormalities, there's messages not getting through fluently because of our posture. There's, even down to like you look at jiu-jitsu, like it's very front body heavy, like core, it's this kind of posture. If you're a guard player, it's this posture a lot. So even that, like you're training postural abnormalities, like there's so many elements to nervous system regulation. There's, even down to like you could be eating perfectly, your posture could be perfect, you could be relaxed and, like consciously working on your self-concept and your state and all of those things, but you work in a job that you absolutely hate with a
Mm,
group of people that you don't feel safe around. And that is going to dysregulate you every time. Right. And so there's like, it's, I'm agreeing with you. And there's so many factors. And sometimes it is a matter of like, what's the thing that's going to kick it over the line for this person?
oh, sorry.
Um,
I kicked the
you're right.
computer. Sorry. I was trying to readjust my posture right now as you were saying that. I was just
I
feeling like my posture was shitty the more you were talking about it.
I am like the worst person for like I sit like a banana all the time. And so I try to check in a lot because especially because I've been doing a lot of wrestling, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I started to notice with wrestling, I was having this like recurring neck thing where it'd be like it'd come up to the back of my skull and then I'd be getting headaches and then it would go down into like my shoulder blade. And I was like, what is this? So I'm asking other wrestlers, like, is this a thing you deal with? And then I started to actually pay attention to my posture and I'm like, oh no, this is just like a pre-existing weakness based on the fact that I predominantly work on my phone or on my laptop. So I sit like this and I tend to kind of like really get into like a really slouchy kind of at-home posture. Um, and so, my wrestling was just exacerbating what was already there. And funnily enough, timing along the same kind of running parallel to that, I would say, I was really struggling to regulate myself in a way that I don't normally. And funny that, right? Like postural challenges, and dysregulating or, dysregulation popping up. It's, I'm not surprised. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Exactly. That's a
Yeah.
great way to put it. I think you're right. I think there's so many things that uh outside influences in it we have to I guess we have to be very careful with the way we do this because I was a strong believer that was like regardless of what happened to you, you have the power within your mind to be like to overcome it.
Yes.
But then I started to realize that like the body is the temple.
Mhm.
So your ability and the tools, you're just if you don't give your body enough of the right things, the proper posture, the correct nutrients. You know what I mean? And this is why I think your answer was incredible because it's like they go hand in hand. People who
Yeah.
are in alignment tend to eat the right things, put the right
Mm.
things in their body, then start making the right decisions and
Mhm.
start regulating these things so they go up together. So that being said, what is your consideration on manifestation? Like when you become in alignment, a lot of these books, they talk about manifesting your goals, getting in
Mm.
alignment like with the universe or with yourself or however you want to say it, whatever esoteric, way of talking about this. But people talk about manifesting to them what they desire, and that it's all about learning how to desire it, kind of. Do you believe in that?
The term manifestation wouldn't be a term that I would personally use.
Okay.
Do I believe that it is a something that exists? Absolutely. I think there's scientific backing for this, and I think largely, um, it's based upon, the one thing that I see in someone who's a good manifester is that they are very much living in alignment with their own unique values, mission, and purpose, right? And so when we
Yo.
look at the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that comes online when we're living a life that's congruent with our values, mission, and purpose, we start to we essentially become like a Google search engine, right? For me, I have this, my friends are always like, how do you do this, Brie? I have this phenomenal ability to just like connect with celebrities, and for the most part, like really world-class entrepreneurs and athletes, because that's aligned with my values, mission, and purpose, right? So it's like
Right.
typing into Google, like future world champion athlete, right? And that's what I'm going to get.
Ooh.
And so when I'm living in alignment with that, when that's my focal point, that's all I see. Like it's, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, we're only ever experiencing our own nervous system reflected back to us. So when we're looking at the world through the lens of like a bigger vision, a bigger purpose, then we're looking through the rose-colored glasses of that. Like I have some wild stories that I've shared over the years around, like trying to get in contact with particular UFC fighters, and then like being on a bus on my way to Melbourne, and coincidentally getting into a conversation with the guy sitting next to me and finding out that he's the liaison of that individual, and suddenly
Yo.
numbers, and I'm on the phone to them 10 minutes later, right? And I don't, like, people are like, you're so lucky, Brie. I don't believe it's luck. I think that first of all, I'm aligned, like I'm clear and I'm aligned with my values, mission, and purpose. But more importantly, I'm willing, because I think my belief is that we always have these opportunities for our manifestations to drop into our felt reality. But most people are too afraid to do what it takes to have it actually land. Right.
Yeah.
And so like in that circumstance, I'm sitting next to the guy who is the missing link to get in contact with the person I'm trying to get in contact with. It didn't feel comfortable to turn and open up a conversation with this guy. Right. But I consistently work on stretching my own edges, building my own capacity, building my own range, which then bridges the gap for that to actually like make itself known in my world. I don't believe that there's ever mistakes. I don't believe in coincidences. Down to like, I would go as far as saying, like, if I bump into someone at the supermarket, or I make eye contact fleetingly with someone, at the supermarket or whatever, that person probably has access to a resource that I'm currently seeking.
Yo.
But what most people do in those circumstances is they go, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, oh, I didn't mean to bump into you. So sorry. And then they go about their day, and they're not actually engaging with the opportunities that the universe or the world, or whatever you want to refer to it as, is
Makes sense.
consistently offering them, right? Because it takes courage. It takes courage to be like, like you bump into someone at the supermarket, like, hi, my name's Brie. Like, tell me about yourself.
You are
That's weird.
stoic. You're a stoic. Ultimate
So
courage is ultimate freedom. That's like a main quote that happens. Yeah, and you're right. Continue.
yeah. And so, I believe that everyone is a master manifester. Like, what we're seeking is always right there. It's just, do we have the courage to do what it takes to peel back the veil and actually like meet it? And that's where most people falter.
Understood. That's really cool. And it makes sense because it's like when you are in alignment, that's all you can think about. And
Hmm.
then so when you talk with people, that's all you say.
Yes.
You know, like your
Yeah.
thoughts, your intentions become thought, your thought becomes words, right? And
Yeah.
then when you're people don't realize how big the net gets, the
Yeah.
funnel gets when they start speaking, because then
Yeah.
the other people who are aligning with that journey are designed to be there. They fall into that funnel right to you.
Yeah. Like even down to, and this is that thing again of like, it's whatever state you're in it's always being reflected back to you. Your nervous system is being reflected back to you. So, when you're so clear on what you're here for and you're so like focused and honed in on that, even the challenges, like even the roadblocks become part of it. Like
Yes.
some of the
You
things
are
that I've
you
struggled with.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but you are fucking stoic. The obstacle is the way. You are the most stoic that there is. I'm sorry, you are. You just need to start accepting that. But anyway, carry on with your stoicism.
um Gosh. So, like I've navigated some intense challenges over the last 4 years. And like the kind of challenges where it's like I don't know if this is for me. Like I'm fuck it. I'm just gonna quit it all, right? And yet I look through life through the lens of like what I'm here for. Like I'm crystal clear on what I am here for. Does it scare the fuck out of me sometimes? Absolutely. But I am crystal clear. And so that's the lens through which I see the world. So of course, these dynamics, these challenges, these adversities, these like things that have got in the way, I can see, I'm like, oh, that's setting me up for this. Like
Right.
I couldn't get there if I didn't go through that.
Yo, I was
And
just having this conversation. I was just having this
yeah.
conversation. Like I suffered for like 10 years mentally, physically, like suffered. You know what I mean? And uh I it's like earning the right to be able to help other people who are suffering.
Yeah.
You know, like I wouldn't be able, I clearly understand my purpose now because I had gone through my suffering.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be very like a fraction as genuine and
Yeah.
authentic as I am now because it's like if I was suffering or I hadn't gone through suffering, how could I really speak to somebody about that?
Yeah.
And I felt that, too, when I was like a personal trainer, it's like I can explain the science, I can explain all this. But if I had never been obese and then lost the weight, then
Yeah.
like there's a missing link there. And my
Yeah.
wife's cousin, he was massively obese, and his that kid's family, he's not a kid anymore, but was massively obese. He lost like hundreds of pounds or something like that, became a personal trainer, but he is a very successful personal trainer. I think it's because he earned that. And
Yes.
these people who have always been yoked, it's like, I totally understand that you love fitness, but maybe it's like you should talk to other people who want to go from being in shape to getting yoked. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
and so it's not that you can't help people lose weight, but there's something missing there that
Totally.
you didn't
Totally.
go through that you can't fully connect with.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I even look at like when you and I first started working together, like you came to me with this freeze mechanism, right?
Hmm.
And at the time, like and truth be told, like I never really connected directly with the freeze response. At that time, my primary mechanism was fight. Like I was just all fight. Like a challenge pops up, fight my way through it, do whatever needs to get done, like put my head down, get through it. And so I could help people through freeze because I understood, like from here, I understood it, but I didn't have
Right.
the embodied experience of it, right? And then not too long after you and I worked together, I went through a particular situation which like stopped me in my tracks. Like I had this financial pressure that I just hadn't really accounted for, and it stopped me to the point that like probably like a solid 18 months of just like, what's the point? This hole is too deep. I'm never getting out of this. There were so many days where I couldn't get out of bed, like I'm a fraud, like all of these stories and
Oh,
freeze, like this heavy shame. freeze mechanism. And it was probably the hardest thing I've ever navigated. And coming out the other side, I'm like, oh, like that needed to happen so that I fucking got it, so that I fully understood what it was like to be in the depths of freeze. And not just, you know, like a little bit of freeze, but like the extremes. And so I reflect on it now of like that made me a phenomenal coach. That made me phenomenal at what I do in a way that most other people can't. Because it gave me the legs of my table. Like it gave me the stability of like, not only do I get it from here, but I get it because I've lived it, and I know where the people who come to me with freeze are operating from now. Um, and I just like there's no other way of earning those stripes than like going through the struggle of it, you know? It's
Literally, like it's what
yeah,
jujitsu is all about, right? There's no other way to earn it. You have to go through the struggle to earn it. No one's going to give it to you.
yes.
And so for
Yeah.
you to be the most authentic and best coach, you had to go through it. And that I think makes it very clear that you deserve to be in that position, but it also clarifies your purpose in life.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I look back again, it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. And there were so many days where I was like, why? Like, why me? Like, what did I do so wrong for this to be the experience? Especially because I was coming off a high, you know, like I was coming off the best year I'd had in many areas of my life to this low, low. But now I look back, you know, being out the other side, I look back and I'm like, thank you. Like, thank you. Because I couldn't do what I do now at the depth that I do without that.
Yeah, baptized in the fire. You there's a quote from Stoicism. It's like you cannot grow without pain, for you are both the sculptor and the statue,
Mm.
right? It sucks, and but that's like I learned who the important people in my life through a very difficult time because through accusations and through other things, I mean, I saw where they stood in my life, and that sucks. But at the same time, I was like, oh, that was a good thing because I found my best friends. I found the
Yeah.
people who were ride or die because now I know because it's been through the fire. Like I know I'm going to respond into a fight because I've been in fights. You know what I mean? I know I'm going to respond in competition because I've been in competition.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think uh I think when we go through those things, like for example, when I went through 10 years of suffering, right? That when you go through that struggle, like I know a lot of people aren't religious, but a lot of the times I believe theology to be very good in their analogies to give us life lessons. But it's like I want to be strong, so God gave me problems, right?
Mm.
And that's true whether you're religious or not. It's like the only way to get strong is to go through problems. The only way to get smart is to solve problems. The only way to like be mentally brave is to be like a coward for a moment and to get over it. There's no other way. You have to know where you stand. And smooth seas do not make for strong sailors. So it's like by and we know this in jiu-jitsu. The more you get your game exposed, the better your game gets.
Yes.
And you put that so beautifully. And the obstacle is away, right? Like the thing that was the most difficult thing that I ever survived became my purpose in life. Who fucking would have known? You know what I mean? And so the
So
people who are going through hard things now, that might be your purpose in life. The fact that I struggled mentally is now my life purpose is to get people off of that track because I figured out why I was there. That's just cool to me. That's awesome. And the way you put it really resonated with me well.
yeah, a mentor of mine, Dr. John D. Martini, has a saying, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it's
That
something
is,
along.
sorry, the best name I've ever heard, ever. John D. Martini,
Yeah.
Dr. John D. Martini. That's an incredible name. All right, shout out. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, he has this saying, which is something along the lines of like, the more down and out you are, the greater your capacity to go up and in. And it's
Yeah.
like, I really do believe that like our deepest challenges come with the seed of there are bigger supports. You know, it's just like, do we have the courage to keep weathering the storm? Um, I often say to my clients, you know, like if you ask for a big life, you can't complain when there's a lot on your plate. You know, like
Oh,
if you ask to be fed, there's going to be a lot on your plate. And so that means like learning how to chew like hell and you know, like just being there for all of it, like navigating all of it. And the more you can handle the negatives, you know, like if we look at the old the yin yang, the balance of the dark and the light, like you
the
can't make
heavens.
one side. Yeah, I've got it here as well.
That's an emblem from my school too.
I know,
Florida
yeah.
State. Yeah,
It's
it's you can't trademark it. It's easy. It's
um yeah, like you can't make one side of that bigger without the other side getting bigger too. You know, like you can't avoid the darkness without also avoiding the light. Like you can't shrink the dark because you're simultaneously and to the same degree shrinking the light. And so, you know, like you've got to learn how to navigate all of it.
yeah, dude, you're stoic. Um, but there's a quote that's beautiful out there, and it made a lot more sense while you were talking. It's just a realization, but it's a there's no man who is wise through chance. There's like no man
Mm,
who has ever been strong through chance.
mm,
You know what I mean? Like it didn't accidentally happen where they fell on knowledge. It was like a lot of sculpting, you know what I mean?
yeah.
To get to that point, to be able to articulate the wisdom and the strength. So it was a lot of heavy lifting to demonstrate the strength. So yeah, that's beautiful. So now let's end this with our debate on stoicism. So you and I feel like stoicism is one of the most misrepresented philosophies ever, yet everybody pulls from stoicism constantly. And then they kind of view stoicism as something else. There's like a big disconnect. And every single thing that you just said here would tell me that you are like the stoic of stoics. So tell me,
The ultimate stoic.
yeah, the ultimate stoic. So tell me why you are not a stoic in your opinion,
Well,
or what your opinion of stoicism is.
Well, for me, it comes down to I don't know enough about Stoicism. Like,
Mm,
I can't claim to be something that I don't comprehend. Um, and like acknowledging here that from what my interpretation of the word stoic is, without having done any like element of research or anything of that nature, um, stoic is to like I don't quite know the right wording, but it's I get this sense of like repression, of like hold it all in and repress. And where that kind of like nudges up against my truth is that I'm all about like, yes, regulate so that you're responding, not reacting. So I can see where there's like stoicism in that, but it's not repression. Like I'm all for expression. I think as well, like I said, a lot of the imagery that I see of stoicism is very much like it's your I can't think of the correct name, but the helmets of like the gladiators, you know, with the big
hmm
red. It's that.
Spartans and yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it's
because it was very
very
popular in the Greeks and the Roman times, so it's often associated. Yeah.
yes. And so the undercurrent I get from that imagery alone is very struggle and like war and like essentially this real undertone of like it's got to be hard. And yes, uh there's threads of that I'm like all for. And again, you can't have one without the other. You can't have one side of the yin yang without having the other. And so my work is very much about, well, let's tap into pleasure and let's tap into ease and let's again range. Let's like build our range to be able to have the capacity to struggle and go to war and grind and work and all of that. But let's not do it at the expense of pleasure and ease and relaxation and flow and effortlessness. Um, and so I would say I'm not a stoic just through lack of thorough comprehension because it's not something that I've really dove into
You are though.
understanding.
You are. It's like, for example, you're white, whether if you know about like pigment and melatonin and things like that, or melatonin, what melanin in the skin. You know what I mean? So like even if you don't understand it all the way, you're still white. Like you know,
Totally.
like
It's not a label that I would choose to use because it would be like me saying like I'm a vegan when I have no idea what veganism is. You know what I mean?
but
Like
if
it's
someone yes and no, because it's like if you were eating a certain way, like for example, is that tea?
yes.
And then I was like, okay, so you're a tea drinker.
Well, I'm
You
not saying
just
I'm not.
displayed it. Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, I'm not saying I'm not. I'm simply saying that I don't understand it enough to claim it, to take
Well,
ownership of it. That's a better way of putting it. I can't claim to
jujitsu
be a vegan if I can't take ownership of being a vegan if I don't have a reference point of what veganism is. I'm not a vegan, by
totally.
the way.
That's why I'm telling you. I'm giving you I am the informant right here. I'm the informant. I'm informing you that you're a stoic. But
Okay.
so here's the thing. Everything you said is like writ within stoicism. Okay? Everything that you just said, it's not about a repression of emotions whatsoever. It's about feeling your emotions. And so one of the Viktor Frankl is one of the Stoics that a lot of people love, and he says, in between stimulus and response is space, and in that space is the ability to choose.
Mhm.
So it's not the it's not the oppression of emotions. In fact, it's the domestication of emotions. And a
Mm.
domesticated animal is, well, I shouldn't say this, but like a dog compared to a wolf. You know what I mean? Dogs are happy
Yeah.
all the fucking time, right? And you know me, I'm happy a majority of the time, even when I was like in some very bad spots that we talked through. You know, even you were like, Chad, you're kind of like down today. Yeah, you know, I had a long day, right? But because I'm normally like bouncy and talkative and so on and so forth. That's if I'm a stoic, I would identify as a stoic, and I dig into Taoism and other things that are going to help me and work for me. I'm not very dogmatic with those things, you know, but it's about feeling those emotions and allowing you, but in the right circumstances at the right times. Like, so one of the big things is like I fucking love pleasure, only if it's earned, you know, and not I shouldn't say only, but most of the time if it's earned. Like I don't like taking pleasure when I haven't earned it, right? But that it's not to say that I'm always just like go, 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 go. Like I have times of extreme work and then extreme relaxation. You know what I mean? And I allow for that. But the thing is, like, we just don't give it to ourselves. We don't feel like we're entitled to it. And so like, yeah, feeling joy. And there are so many quotes in Stoicism, and they talk about the difference between happiness and joy, and they refer to it as like happiness is in this moment, but joy is like a long-term thing. So even when you feel like irritated with something, your overall life is like in a state of joy, right? And how we how we go about our lives to ensure that we are most in alignment with the natural world is what they would say. But what
Mm.
is where do humans align in the natural world, and how to live as close to that as possible is what they call a state of ataraxia, basically like nirvana or something like that, where it's like that's going to be the ultimate like bliss. But it's funny because it's recognized that that's going to come with hard work. You're not just going to
Mm.
sit there and like everything drift away. It's like you're working, you're doing the day-to-day thing. You're like you're grinding, and then you're feeling good. And like when you feel that, and so like a flow state is like ataraxia. It's like when you're in jujitsu, it's like one of the most beautiful feelings you can get, but you're working hard. Everyone
Yeah.
thinks you need to like go off to the mountain and get away from all the distractions and export all these negatives in your life to reach that state of nirvana, where stoics are like you could do it now. The
Yeah.
bliss, the best retreat from the world is your own mind, your own soul. It's something that they
Mm.
often talk about, but it's not the oppression of emotions. But what I think why it gets sent with that is because so many gladiators and so many warriors, Greek warriors, Roman soldiers, they look to stoicism a lot to help them with battle, so as to regulate their
Mm.
emotions in battle, to stay human You know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
talked about earlier, when it was time to go animalistic and to guide you even in the smallest details of like, hey, I know you're miserable. Get the fuck up anyway and go. You know, I do
Mm,
not let that emotion control you. And
mm,
then it goes so far that it's like do things that you don't want to do so that way they don't control you. So it's like
mm,
getting in the ice bath every day. Yeah, it's miserable, but how good do I feel afterwards? And now the control doesn't, like the cold doesn't control me anymore.
mm.
You know what I mean? Things
Yeah,
like that. So
totally.
there's a ton of joy in Stoicism, and it is absolutely not the repression of
Mm,
emotions.
yeah.
And as I think you and I would both agree, the repression and ignorance of emotions is the way I would put it. It's something that's not good for your body. It's not good for the soul, and it's not good for any physiological process of who you are, especially when we like to say the body is the temple. So it's
Mm,
good to touch and go. It's
yeah.
like I felt that. Why am I feeling that? What kind of response does that deserve? What kind of
Mm,
response, you know what I mean, is a good representation of my morals? Because if
mm,
somebody causes a emotional compromise in my spiritual structure, right? And then I respond like an animal,
mm,
I'm still just an animal, regardless of what the reason was.
yeah.
So I wouldn't consider that repressing an emotion. I wouldn't consider like I just say it's not a justification for you to act like an animal. It says you're
Mm,
better than that. And so
yeah.
still feel it. And then now you could even convert that into a positive thing to be like, man, that
Yeah.
person is really struggling. That's probably why they did that to me. And I bet I'm in a position to either not make it worse or maybe even make it better. And all of a sudden, you know what I mean? So whatever you would have felt, you just transformed it. So energy does not care about positive or negative.
Mm,
Energy
yeah.
just is. And then you utilize that energy however you best see fit. And
Mm,
so I think Stoicism is taking that energy, which are emotions, and not allowing ourselves to be controlled by emotions. We are not our emotions. Right? We shouldn't be a response to our emotions. We shouldn't be a justification in our responses to emotions. Stoicism is taking responsibility for everything that you do, your actions, your thought, so on and so forth, which is why I would consider you a Stoic because you are like a perfect and beautiful representation of, I think, how people should navigate life. And I'm a Stoic and I read up on Stoicism every day. And you are just like quote after quote after quote of Stoic,
oh, thank you for sharing that. I think, you
which
know
is,
what I
by the
think?
way, the best, I think, the best life philosophy, maybe with Taoism, could like compare with it. So I believe you are like one of the best representations of what I believe to be the best practical life philosophy on the planet.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Um, I think, like listening to you talk, I think my resistance to it, and again, this is very much based on like a lack of research, like a lack of comprehension of what Stoicism is, and there's two parts to that. But I think part of my resistance is it's all very masculine undertoned. So
Yeah.
everything you've just described, a mentor of mine, Pamela Horner, teaches a concept called feminine dominance. And it
Mhm.
sounds like what I hear is that there's parallels, like stoicism and feminine dominance. Um, I resonate with that because it's like feminine, whereas stoicism is very like it seems quite like which like that's not it's bringing logic to emotion and emotion to logic. So it's not to say it is, but just the undertone and I think the way it's commonly expressed feels very masculine to me. And I think the other thing is I have this one particular individual in my mind who I've heard many people refer to him as, oh, he's just very stoic.
Mm.
And there's one thing I excel at, in my opinion, it's seeing what's underneath. Like it's the subtleties that no one else notices, right? Like it's the subtle threads that are there, like the micro nuances. And so everyone just says, oh, he's just very stoic. I look at him and I'm like, you are a ticking time bomb of repressed emotions, just waiting to explode. And I've seen it. I've seen these moments of like
Yeah.
just these big blow ups, which I think is sadly a lot of men and women for that matter. But I think, and perhaps the term's being used out of context, but hearing him referred to as like, oh, he's just a very stoic individual. I think of it as like that brick wall, like,
Hmm.
I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to be vulnerable because vulnerability means you're a pussy or whatever the dial, the narrative is.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that's my resistance. And hearing you describe it, I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'll go chuck it in my Instagram bio. Like,
Still, but you know what? I would agree with you because two things. That guy is probably not an actual stoic, right?
absolutely.
And so there's this connotation with stoicism, and I think a lot of it comes back to like Marcus Aurelius is when he was the most powerful man in the world, and he was a stoic, right? And he did not allow his values, his virtues, and his soul to be corrupt by all the power that he had. Everybody thinks that they're going to make the right decision until they get power. So you know what I mean? Power
Mm.
corrupts so absolutely. So it was just cool to see. I think he's one of the best humans who ever lived, if not the best human who ever lived, because he actually practiced what he preached as the most powerful human in the world. And when he conquered the known world at the time, that was important, right? We have to be, he didn't conquer the whole world, but the known world that was important of the time, right?
Yes.
The Mediterranean, the middle of the world, right? The middle of Earth. He conquered it and comes back, and people are just like worshiping him. And he forced some dude, if I remember correctly, to whisper in his ear the whole time, memento mori, which is remember, you're going to die. You're just a mortal. Yeah, you were just a mortal man who happens to be in this position. And so like he wouldn't accept oftentimes like he didn't think he deserved the praise he was getting and he didn't want it to get to his head. And so a lot of the times people started to mimic that. And it's like when they were about to go into battle, it's like he didn't look scared. You know what?
Mm.
Whatever came his way, right? It just rolled off his back. And so, yeah, it's oftentimes surrounded for sure, especially in its lore, I guess you could say, surrounded with men and masculinity. And I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think that's a very, very fair statement. It's definitely surrounded about men being faced with a lot of the brutalities of the world. And so it's saying it's like, don't fucking care, stop complaining, keep going, right?
Mm.
When the time, when and then feeling that when the time is necessary. So we have to find the right time and place. You know what I mean? And I tell the kids that in my kids class all the time. I was like, I don't give a fuck. Finish the fight. I don't say that, but I'm like, finish the fight. The blood's going to wash off your skin. The blood's going to wash off your uniform. The blood's going to wash off the mats. But now is not a time where you can show weakness. If this
Mm.
is a real fight, you have to know how to train through that. Later
Mm.
on, you know what I mean? Go cry in your room, like do whatever you need to. But for that moment, if you show weakness, your enemy, your opponent is going to take advantage of that. Even if you
Mm.
feel like your knee's going to explode, do not show them. You know, right?
Mm.
Because what do you think they're going to attack next? You know what I mean? I'm get exaggerating, but I try to teach them there's a time and place for everything. So it's like be stoic in that moment. It could be that connotation of like, let's not, the stoic thing is like to not show emotion in a false connotation, I guess I would
Mm.
say. So if you have that associated with him, I would also agree that's probably a false connotation. And people
Yes.
oftentimes use that as a false, I guess, they inject it falsely into dialogue. You know what I mean? Into discourse. So it's like, oh, he's very stoic. Just because he's not showing emotion, that's like a complete misrepresentation of stoicism. But I understand the connotation because of the people that connotation was built upon. You know what I mean?
Mm.
That lore, like I said. But now, is her name? Is her name like Meg Ryan or something like that? There's that girl with like the big black glasses, the lady. God, my wife loves listening to her, but she sends me stuff all the time of this lady who she says stoic shit all the time. And I'm like, yeah, that's like stoicism, just rewrapped with a woman saying it. And she's like, maybe it's just the way she says it. And I'm like, okay. And so I get where you're coming from. There needs to be
Mm.
it's like it's not what's being said, it's like how it's being said. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
what's very interesting is like every single thing that you said makes sense in stoicism, regardless of its feminine or masculine, in my
Yeah.
opinion. But
Totally,
I
yes.
believe that stoicism is dominated by that masculine energy because every single stoic, like most of them who are have any sort of like authorship that most people know are men.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's even like I said earlier, the marketing is very like, the like I follow and I don't know for sure, but I would assume that he would be considered a stoic. There's a guy, he goes by the Magister on Instagram. You might know his stuff.
Hmm.
Um, Love it. And it's just quotes. It's just like quotes and kind of little like tidbit kind of insights. But his marketing is very like it's got that undertone of like the gladiatorial kind of
Yeah,
like,
like some
the
ripped
fight.
gladiator dude and some stoic quote.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, yeah,
And like I reshare his stuff often because I'm like, yes, but I'm like, can you give it a different like imagery? Like, I don't know, have some
yeah.
have like something, just give us a little bit of like a pink background or just
Yeah.
something balances the other side.
I say
Um,
that to my wife all the time. I was like, this is stoicism just wrapped in flowers. Like, it's the same words. It's just nicer font and like, I mean, roses. Like, okay, whatever. But as long as you're vibing with it, good. You know what I mean? As long as the message is hitting you.
yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I think you should become the next famous female stoic author. You should totally do it. There, like, I bet that's a huge market that's missing. You're
Yeah.
bringing stoicism uh, to the feminist movement, and so that way they're not a bunch of like man-hating whatevers. They actually like that. It's like, oh, there's power within this. You know what I mean? So I
It's so
think that would be
interesting
cool.
because you shared that, and this is like the other side of the coin, right? Like you shared there's a specific client that I worked with many years ago that I have in mind here who, like you said, with the kids, like look, you're in the fight. Now's not the time to cry, right? Like don't show that now. Um, this particular athlete, she's a world champion Muay Thai fighter. And I
Yo,
remember she was having like a bit of it was like a return. She'd had some time off. She was making her kind of return. There was a lot of pressure on her. Like there was all eyes were on her. And she was kind of hitting this glass ceiling consistently when it came to like the final kind of weeks of her fight camp. And I said to her, well, like, what's going on? Without giving too much away, she sort of, she's like, there's just all this emotion from past shit that had happened with previous fights that comes to the surface when I hit a certain threshold, when I'm hitting pads. And I was like, well, what's the emotion that comes up? And she's like, just like frustration, but like frustration in like tears of frustration. And I was like, so what do you do in those moments? She's like, well, I'm not going to show that. You can't show that when you fight. So I push it back down. And I'm like, there's all this energy there that you're not utilizing because you're pushing it back down. So I'm like, the next time it comes up, I want you to just let it out. But not to like weaken, not to like, oh, I'm sad and like, oh, I can't hit pads anymore because I'm sad, but to act like as rocket fuel. Like use it,
yeah,
like use that, like it's like a pressure valve, that gives you that like it's like hitting the, what is it, the nitro button or whatever.
yeah, the Nas, yeah,
Yeah, no, so that's the one. So I'm like, think of it like that. And she was like, oh, like very edgy for her, right? Again, we're talking
hmm
about range here. There was this place that she wouldn't let herself go because it wasn't safe. So I said, well, just play in it and see what happens. Like worst case scenario, you're like, no, that was fucking weird, not happening again. So she framed it up with her coach and said, hey, I just want to say, if you see me in tears, don't stop. Like we'll just continue the round as normal. She rings me that day and she's like, holy fuck. Like I
yo,
hit another level today. And like she annihilated her opponent. Like the most dominant performance I think I've ever seen. And I've watched a lot of fights. Um, and it was like, oh, and her words were like, you took the handbrake off.
yeah,
Right. And so that's kind of the polarity of like, yes, I hear you on the like, don't show weakness. I do it all the time at jiu-jitsu. Like sometimes I'll get frustrated or like I'm getting my ass handed to me or whatever. And I'll say to my training partner, like, hey, just a heads up, I'm about to cry. Don't stop rolling though. And like, it's odd. The guys are like, okay, like, are you sure? But it's like, it's rocket fuel to me. I'm like, I
It
know that if
is.
I know for me, and everyone's a little bit different, but for me, if I push it back down when it's there, it festers and then it takes over me. So then it becomes this thing of like, I'll be rolling and I'm like, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed and like that hurt and like oh, I'm losing and then it's like this downward spiral into hopelessness, and then I freeze. That's when my freeze mechanism comes online. Whereas when I'm like, I'm just going to let this do its thing and run its course, but do it with power so that I'm still holding the frame, right? Like, it's not, the tears aren't taking over me and I'm at their mercy. I'm the master, right? Like, I'm holding the dominant frame in that context to just kind of like observe it move through. And every time it's like, boom, okay, there I am. Like, that's gone, cool. Channel's clear, let's go. So it's that thing of like, it's the, we're talking about the same coin, but it's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that, because what I do is when my kids start doing that, I tell them like, this isn't the time, and I make them fight. So any
Yeah.
time a kid like breaks down, I make them fight again. And then it's
Yes.
funny because then it immediately goes from tears to like, and they turn into
Yeah.
like this little monster, like this little Tasmanian devil. And then it gets to the point where like my more advanced kids now, like it's just is rocket fuel all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
we like, you said it way more elegantly, but I watch that now, like understand what's happening, because like I watch them go from breaking down. I'm like, nope, get back up and fight. And then they work,
Mm.
it's like they worked through it, and it's like that got transformed into the rocket fuel, like ball and chain to rocket fuel. It's cool. It's cool that
Yeah.
you said that. And I'm starting to feel that more too. So that's really cool. I have one
Yeah.
more question. One
Go.
more question before we go off. Um, what would you say to people, especially entrepreneurs or people who are trying to get on the path of success, to feel comfortable asking for what you want? Like, so
Practice.
practice, sorry. Like, I'll say this though. Yeah, practice, but it's like you charge a certain amount for your services. And then when you ask for that money, when you start to realize you're worth that money and you can ask for that, and somebody else is willing to pay it, or maybe you don't know if somebody else is willing to pay it. How do you get to that point
Yeah.
where it's okay to ask for money for what you're worth?
Oh. Again, practice. And I'll elaborate. Um, our nervous system learns through experience, right? So every time we have an experience in a safe place, like you use the analogy of jiu-jitsu, like it's combat in a safe container. Every time we have an experience, and we don't die, it's very black and white. Our nervous system kind of processes information with, did I die? No, then, like, it's there's a pathway there to familiarity. But it's like, oh, Chad, like, pay me this much money. Chad says no. Okay, well, I get to practice holding myself in rejection. I call it rejection therapy, like building my capacity to be with no, right? And then I ask again and again and again, and I build my capacity to be with rejection until I get my yes, right? Because a lot of the time, again, it's that courage piece. People avoid doing the thing because it's like they haven't built the capacity to hold not having what they want. So you can't have what you want until you can hold not having it. Range, right? So like building the capacity to hold rejection, you no longer fear rejection. So that gives you the courage to then go out and start asking for the things that you want. Does that make
Can I tell
sense?
you, can I tell you something really weird?
Go.
There was a study that when I was in sales way back in the day, I'm talking about forever ago, Chad. Uh, and he told me a story about they were doing the study at this college, and this dude, his job was to go out with these girls and just ask. Like, they sat down, hi, my name's this, my name's this. And he's like, let's just cut the bullshit. Let's go. let's go have sex. We know what we're doing here. That was his goal, right? Just to ask for sex right off the bat. And he was so uncomfortable doing that, that when, and this wasn't the, by the way, what ended up happening in the study wasn't the reason for the study. Okay. But this is what came out of it. So he'd sit down and he would be so uncomfortable that he would have to do this. He's like, do you want to like go back to my place? And his rejection was super high. And then once he got comfortable with rejection, all of a sudden he was like, if she says no, whatever, I know how to deal with this. And all of a sudden he started getting like suave with it. He's like, yeah. And then he was more comfortable and like his presence was less threatening. And then all of a sudden his success started to
Yeah.
rapidly climb.
Yeah.
And that was like the I guess like the little coaching session I had for sales, when it's like when you feel like you don't deserve what you're about to ask for, when you are scared of the rejection, like the people who you're asking feel that. So that's very interesting. It's funny that that study, you said that study basically perfectly. It's like when you're okay holding rejection, it makes
Yeah.
success worth it. Like it
Totally.
makes it makes, I guess, your capacity to handle the success. It's like you've, I guess earning is the right word, but range, like you said, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had a client, an entrepreneurial client many, many years ago who was really struggling financially. She's like, I'm not making sales. And I was like, why? And we kind of dug into it, and it came down to she was terrified of people thinking that she was being like sleazy, salesy. So
Hmm.
I said, I was like, I want you to, and like that stems from like a fear of rejection, a fear of being outcasted, and so on. So I said to her, I was like, I want you to just collect as many no's as you can over the next week. Like, don't try to make sales, just try to collect no's. Like, get it rejected as many times as possible and practice holding the discomfort of that. And like, record week for her in sales.
Wow.
A numbers game to a degree, but also like we just slightly moved the needle of like no longer is there this like gripping, white knuckled, panicked, anxious attachment to getting the sale and avoiding the rejection. But it was like, oh, like I'm okay with this. And if that happens, even better. So then it was like, oh, like just complete relaxation through her system. She's human again, as you put it, rather than being kind of more animalistic. And
Hmm.
record week in sales. Um, and so, it's that thing again of like, if we think of any experience as being two sides of the same coin, you can't put the coin in your piggy bank until you're willing to actually experience both sides of it. Like if you're trying to collect half coins, you want the tails side, not the head side. It's not going in the piggy bank. So you've got to learn how to be able to have both before you can actually like claim it. And that's where most people, tap out of having what they want because they're like, oh, I don't want to deal with the judgment or the
Yeah.
rejection or the grindstone.
I'm probably going to listen to this podcast multiple times just to hear you talk about this stuff. But it truly is like the obstacle is a way. If the obstacle is you're being afraid of being told no, then get told no until it's not
Mm,
an obstacle anymore.
yeah.
Like,
One of my sorry.
no, no, no. I was done.
Yeah, one of my biggest things for me in my business, like I've had many experiences over the years from childhood of like I would call it being witch hunted, like
Whoa.
people are kind of yeah, like this like building an army and like coming after me for the work that I do for even as a kid, like just me doing my thing. And that is to this day still one of my deepest fears of like there's edges on the degree at which I'll let my work be seen because I fear being like publicly executed in a nutshell. And so part of the work that I play in is I'm like to friends, like, oi, go comment some nasty shit on this post of mine. Right. Or like just hit me with the shit that I don't want to hear.
Hmm.
Right. And I practice hearing it. You know, even like whatever, if there's a particular thing that I'm scared that someone's going to reflect back to me, I'll get my friends to be like, hey, can I get you to just like repeat it? Just like feed it to me and let me practice like holding it with power and with dignity until it's like you said, just water off a duck's back. Because it's capacity, it's range, like can you hold it? And the moment the moment you allow circumstances to be bigger than you, like it's there's overflow, and that's when reaction happens, and that's when our fight, flight, freeze kicks into gear, and that's when we take a step back when we want to be taking a step forward. And so it's just you just got to keep showing up for the thing.
Yo, you are definitely a stoic. Yeah, being prepared for the worst thing.
That's
There's this
like,
thing in Stoicism called negative visualization. And it's like, what's the thing that you're most scared of? And then sit with it. Imagine all the things going wrong, which is weird because everyone's like, think of all the best things and blah, blah, blah. But to the point where it's like you almost hope that thing goes wrong because you're so well prepared for it.
yes.
Like, how
Yeah.
many times in jujitsu are you like, oh, I wish a motherfucker would? Because if the
Yeah.
worst thing happens right now, I am the better one who's prepared for this.
Yeah, I had a dynamic with I was running a big presentation. It was like a potentially career altering presentation. And there was this one individual that I was like, "Ooh," like I'm a bit worried. I knew they'd bought a ticket, and I was like, I'm worried they're going to heckle me. And funnily enough, the presentation was about nervous system regulation under pressure
Hmm.
and under high stress circumstances. And so I went into it. I was like, okay, like let worst case scenario, this individual shows up, they're heckling me, I'm getting nervous, I'm like losing my train of thought, I'm like, I freeze up, like all of these things, worst case scenario. And then I'm like, oh my God, that's like the ultimate depiction of why I do what I do. Like thank you for giving me the most perfect example, real-time example of my work. Someone in fight mode heckling me and me in freeze mode freezing up. So I'm like, I
Hmm.
hope it happens.
Oh
I
yeah.
hope that plays out, because then it's like, thank you so much for just taking something that I'm explaining as theory and giving it like a practical, tangible example. And of course,
Totally.
it didn't end up playing out because I'd already mitigated it within myself. But I'm kind of like, damn, like that would have been dope if it did.
Right? We suffer more in
Yeah,
imagination than reality.
yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, that was incredible. I was on the edge of my seat virtually with every single thing that you were saying. I'm glad to know that you have joined our stoic ranks, and we welcome your feminine energy within the stoic ranks to hopefully help make some good changes or additions rather.
One of
Um,
us. One of
one of
us.
dude, you're gonna start slowly like adding like stoic pages, and you're gonna be like, oh, I totally dig this. You know what I mean? But it dude, if you were to like read in on some of these things, man, it's like right up your alley. It's crazy.
Watch
The
my
other
brain
thing,
to like gladiator themes and like
well, it's gonna make sense because you're a fighter too, and so I think that's why it resonates so well with a lot of us warriors because it like Taoism and Stoicism and these other philosophies coming from like warrior societies, it makes a
Mm,
lot of sense. And especially since now you're in a warrior society amongst the jujitsu culture, like I think it'll resonate with you. And maybe that's why it's a lot of masculine energy because of all the Stoics were usually either
mm.
like slaves or they were military members or generals or you know what I mean? So a
Yeah.
lot of the quotes that resonate in the world is because that's what propagated at that time. But uh,
Mm,
do you have
yeah.
any? Do you have? Okay, let's just do this. One, shout outs, and do you have any last words to say to like cap this beautiful conversation?
Shout outs. Well, I want to thank you for starters, for having me on the podcast, but also for putting your trust in me and my work. I think like a lot of the time, this is something I come up with consistently. And it's very backwards in my opinion, but it's like I'm a blue belt. So like as a blue belt, how could you possibly teach anyone how to regulate in a competitive sense. Like you can't teach black belts how to regulate when you're only a blue belt. So I think that, there's it doesn't make sense to me, but I'm thankful. I'm always thankful for the people who are willing to look past my lack of jujitsu expertise and see my nervous system expertise for what it is. So
I think that
yeah,
makes sense
obviously you're
though.
part of that.
Like I go to a physical therapist to help with my jujitsu injuries, though they don't do jujitsu, but it's often I only go to uh like PTs who do jujitsu because they understand what I'm doing. And so since the fact that
Yeah,
you do
yeah,
jujitsu in general just makes you that much better at understanding. So yeah, you're a black belt in what you do, but it's cool that there's crossover that you're a blue belt in jujitsu as well.
yeah.
So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, totally. So yes, I appreciate you and anyone who has put their trust in me and my work and is open to it, because I do think it's innovative and it's going to change the game, and I'm witnessing it change the game. But there's always that, you got to get traction, and you got to come up against a lot of people who don't get it and aren't willing to get it. Um, yeah, so yeah, just thank you. That would be my shout out to you. And a final message. There are no mistakes. Like whatever you're navigating, it's like it's there. It's the biggest blessing you've ever received. It just takes maybe just, getting up and moving to a different vantage point to see it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Such a stoic message from a stoic. You are such um but yes, you're right. It's not about what happens, it's about how you respond to it, right? I don't
Yeah.
make mistakes. Mistakes made me. Connor Price, right? It's seriously, that's a beautiful message. Now, when we talk about shout outs, I'm going to give a shout out for you anyway. If there's anybody who, wherever you're at in your jujitsu journey, competitive journey, entrepreneurial journey, I strongly suggest meeting up with Brianna, doing maybe a consultation, right? Will you give me a link to put in the description? And
Yeah,
I already
absolutely.
have your link for my bio. So if you actually go to my link, it's going to be like become the best competitor that you've always wanted to be, or something like that. That's Brianna Brawley. And so maybe I'll just put your name in there so people know what I'm talking about. So to book with Brianna is going to be the link in the description or my bio, and it's going to say Brianna Brawley. Is that okay if I do it like
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Oh, I love that.
And so for people to connect with Brianna, it's going to be in my link tree. And it helped me so much. After I talked to Brianna, I went from being a nervous wreck, somebody who just went through a business split and been accused of it was like high school bullshit. And I was just, it's probably one of the darkest places I have ever been to. I talked to Brianna, and then I end up winning Nogi Pans, and I did very well at Nogi Pants.
Mm.
And I was actually uh, got all the way to bronze in the absolute division as a featherweight. So that was pretty cool. And I didn't even lose that match technically. I had a leg cramp that hit so hard, like the person had to come out there and like fix me because it sucked. But uh, regardless, bronze is a good medal to get as a featherweight in absolute. And so anyway,
Totally.
after that, I was both the number one ranked black belt in gi and no gi for brown belt in my division, as well as the fifth overall ranking brown belt at amongst all the weights, which was really cool because as a featherweight, that it's usually the top like 30 are like ultra heavies and other things. So for me to be the fifth one as a featherweight was really cool, and I owe a lot of that to Brianna. So if you want to feel that success, right? And I was in a horrible place when that happened. And I think I even did a video of me winning like a bunch of times, like me the last 2 months since I met Brianna, right? I just win after win after win. So if you want that to get knocked off that like kind of like that loser mindset, not necessarily loser mindset, but something that's just not tracking, and get knocked into that winner mindset, Brianna's a person to talk to. Go to the link in the description. And if you want to learn more about going carnivore, a little bit of what I talked about earlier, you want to learn jujitsu, right? You're not, already in jujitsu. It's someone who's never done jujitsu before. They want to learn it. They're new. there's some sort of like barrier, but you still watch Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink and you're like, I want to do it, but something I'm not doing. I've created, here's my ask. See, I'm going to ask them. uh, I've created an online community. It's called the Combat Carnivore Community, the CCC. And in there, I'm doing my best to reverse this atrocity of mental health, physical health, chronic illness. And I believe our system is corrupt and poisoning us, and especially our veterans. To me, it's horrible that every single day we're missing more veterans, you know? And so the longer it takes this message to get to them, the more I miss out on helping them. So anyway, in that community, I'm getting people involved in steak strangles and stoicism, which is learning more about carnivore, because we just can't convert to carnivore overnight. There's wrong ways to do it. Getting you involved in some sort of combat simulation, right? Like Jiu Jitsu. It's one of my favorite things. And I have my entire introductory course on there. And then stoicism, which is basically what Brianna does, right? She's teaching you though, and she's much better than I am at that. But the idea is I'm creating this niche, I'm creating this community of like-minded people who want to reverse what's happening in society right now. So that's my ask. Go to the link in the description and either book with Brianna if you're already, competing and you want to get that. Tell everyone your title again.
Nervous system regulation coach, I suppose. Nervous system and performance coach, something like that.
Yeah. And then if you're brand new to that, book a free consultation with me, especially if you want to talk more about mental health, chronic illness, so on and so forth, or you just have questions in general. So thank you so much, Brianna. You're a beautiful person. Thank you so much for coming on my show. Anything before I hit end?
Thank you. Appreciate you. Love your work.
Thank you.